thanks for coming. We're looking forward to hearing your talk. I used to teach history before I was a librarian, so yeah, I'd love to learn everything. And a lot of things you don't find out in textbooks. So thank you for coming. Just some quick housekeeping. If you need restrooms, they're right through those doors. If you have a cell phone, you would make sure it's on airplane mode. And you're welcome.
All right. Very good. Thank you. I want to thank the library system, by the way, for hosting us here. We're not paying anything for it. They're kind enough to grant that to us. And tomorrow we'll be in Key West at the library down there. So we're sort of bouncing around the Keys. Found a good excuse to come down here, right? It's always nice to do that. But anyway, I'm Doug Kelly. That is Kelly. I'll give her more of an introduction in a minute. And our faithful hound there, Amber. So this is not really our house in Clearwater. That's just a picture for funsies. Oh, got to turn it on.
Christine's good at that.
Okay, thanks. Okay. I'm a military brat.
Wow.
That was my dad. He was a World War II fighter pilot. So I lived all over the world kind of as a kid growing up. And I went to University of Miami on, of all things, a golf scholarship.
So you know Norm Parsons?
Yeah, well, are there any Canes in here? All right, yay, all right, very good, very good.
Oh no.
Is anyone from the Mafia here today? Just in case, I brought my gun.
And dig up the ground there.
Yeah, they are. That's me with my our best friend there, Amber. Yeah. And there's Kelly. Now, Kelly knows I like to fish. And one time I got my tackle and my rods, I'm heading out the door. And she said, where are you going? I said, I'm going fishing. She says, yeah, who do you love more, me or fishing? And I said, inshore or offshore? Of course, I'm only kidding. There we are. We actually co-host a radio show up in the Tampa Bay area. Yeah. And I was the editor of Sport Fishing, managing editor of Florida Sportsman, contributor a lot to Saltwater Sportsman over the years. And these are the other books I've written. All of my books have been endorsed by the National Insomniac Association. If you have trouble sleeping, you read them. Pictures of me are $25. If we sleep together, it's $100. Just thought I'd warn you up. All right, and I dedicated the book to the good guys, okay? Cops, the prosecutors, politicians, all the people who were offered bribes, and believe me, they all were, especially back in the day when cops were making $10 a week or $30 a week. Judges were making $12,000 a year. And if somebody came up to offer you a lot of money, hey, will you take $1,000 a month or $1,000 a week to look the other way, or to tip us off if anything's going to happen? Most of them took it. Some of these old country prosecutors and police officers and what have you. And then we have Jeff Gautier, but we'll talk about him some other time. So initially, the Mafia sprang from street thugs. People came out, they started just robbing people and committing different types of crimes. And then once people became organized, they formed their own territories and boundaries. And the Italian mob was the best known for doing that. That's mostly, there are others. There's Irish, Mexican, Russian, naturally Cuban, as we have in Miami. So they had a whole family structure and decided to become organized like a corporation. And that's how they worked out, right there. You got a boss, a consigliere, who is like your advisor, also maybe your successor who you can trust. Under that is the underboss. He takes out, and I'm always saying he because they didn't have women in the Mafia in any of that structure, so I'm not being a misogynist. But the underboss was always someone who pretty much ran everything for the boss, but all the major decisions were made by the boss. And then below that were your captains, the capo regime, they call them capos. And then under them were soldiers. These were the street people who actually did the murders and burglaries and the crimes under the captain, under the supervision of the captain. And below them were people who were not made men. And I'll get to that in a second. There was a sit down there of different people, really doesn't mean them, but they would have a seating arrangement where the head person was there and then the different bosses from different areas. You can see Joseph Marcello, the New Orleans boss, and Aniello del Croce was an underboss in the Gambino family. And something happened in 1920. There was a giant present for all organized crime, prohibition. Prohibition was where they prohibited any use or sales of alcohol. So guess who rushed in to fill the void? And that's where they first made all their big money, was bootlegging liquor. And they formed speakeasies, hidden places, where you may have seen in old movies where they have a sliding opening in the door, you have to have a password to come in, and you walk in and there's people drinking and having fun and gambling and what have you. And there's somebody up in Tallahassee. It's a pretty bad picture, but you got to remember that was taken over 100 years ago. Here's somebody up in Tallahassee, and they were supporting prohibition. And they were the dries. The people who vote dry were for making it illegal. The wets were the opposite. Those were demonstrations and marches all over the country, different cities. Here's a prohibition raid in Miami. They found some liquor in the underground area. Here's another one. They busted liquor. They take them out and break up all the bottles and throw things away. It's really pretty sad. Many of you guys who've been here a while will know this guy named Cabrera. Jorge was the biggest drug kingpin in the Keys from the 1980s all the way through most of the 90s. And he, of course, that's not his wife, that's Hillary. He was a Democrat. He gave $20,000 to the Democrat Party. They found out he was in prison on drug charges. They sent the check back. They mailed a check to make it get out of the problem there. But this still circulated everywhere, of course. But anyway, his wife is Angel Cabrera. She's still here. And after he got out of prison after 17 years, I think he was in the Keys. He had a cottage, rentals, turned legit, and he's been dead now. He died a couple of years ago.
What was his first name again?
Jorge. George.
Yeah.
All right, because this is an example of a super guy who gets got involved with the wrong people. He came down here and opened a great restaurant. Some of you may have remembered it in Key Largo. You remember the name of it?
Quay?
The Quay. It was sensational. It was crowded every night, every day. And he had made all of his money in sub shops. Miami subs, and before that he was up in Canada. He came over from Greece on a ship when he was 16, got involved in sub shops up there, and soon became a partner, sold out, came to Miami. So Gus decided he needed to be a little more expansive. This is an example again of your appetite for expansion ending up in indigestion. He ended up getting in partnership on cruise ships. Remember the party cruise ships, the Sun Cruise, whatever, would go off shore 3 miles in international water? Well, some of his partners were mafiosi. And he got on the wrong side of the mafia. They decided to eliminate him, and they did. He had an office up in Hollywood, and he was leaving the office one evening, and a car pulled in front of him, a car pulled behind him, a car pulled up next to him and emptied 6 shots into his car, 4 which went into him. He lived for about another 10 minutes, and they drove to a tree and died. If he had just stayed away from the mafia, but he couldn't resist the money. Well, this is the most famous mafia guy of all time, right? Al Capone, we've all heard of him. Believe it or not, he was one of the first people who came to Florida. discovered Florida. All the other ones, Meyer Lansky and all the others, started coming to Florida after he did. And that was in 1928. He actually bought property in 1925 in St. Petersburg. So when he got convicted of tax evasion, they took away all of his properties. That was his house in St. Pete. And that was a place he owned, a nightclub in St. Pete. All of it he lost. But he, a few years later, bought a place in Palm Island. And that's an aerial of it. And that's an old aerial because everything's built up all on both sides of it. And that's right near Miami Beach. That was his house and his property and his dock. And when he started coming down here, he started spreading the word. All the people in New York City and everywhere says, my God, the weather's fantastic. I go fishing all the time. It's wide open. There's no law enforcement. I mean, what there is nothing. Not like it was back in the 30s and 40s when the FBI and the IRS and all started getting into the interest of the mafia. There was nothing like that in Florida. Just some of your local cops here and there, and they were easily bribed. So it started the floodgates. And this is one of the guys. You probably heard of Meyer Lansky. He was one of the few major mobsters who was not Italian, Jewish. But they made an exception because he had a business mind. He was able to take all of these people who were skimming money from different businesses, how to keep different books, and how to evade any suspicion. There he is. He was called their accountant, and he kept a lot of gangsters away from the law because of his business acumen. But he stayed a mobster until he retired in Miami Beach, in a condo there. Okay, this is one of the mobsters who came down from one of the 5 families. His name is Pasquale Ari. He had an Italian restaurant called Pasquale's up in North Miami for a while. And he was a gangster representing one of the 5 families. I think the Lucchese family. There was Lucchese, Gambino, and other prominent 5 altogether. And I never met him, but I met him. And that's Bobby Era, his son. And his son was sitting down there, and the reason he hides his left arm behind him is because he only had 2 fingers on his left hand. How he tarpon fished, holding that rod between that, and pumping and winding, he loved to tarpon fish, and that's him there off Homosassa. Anyway, I got to know him because I was in the security business at the time, and we were doing shoppings, what they call mystery shoppings, where we go in as regular customers, we check out what's happening at the bar, the service, whether everything was going into the register, and he owned a bunch of Italian restaurants. So I got to know him. He found out I liked to fish. He joined Bonefish and Tarpon Unlimited, which is based in now Bonefish and Tarpon Trust, which was out of Ocean Reef. And I got to know this guy pretty well, and I found out he had a very violent persona. Not if you didn't mess with him, but I went with him one time. We were in Whale Harbor. We were sitting at the bar counter, and the girl there was named Heidi, I think, or something, the barmaid. And somebody across from there was saying very insulting things to the sexual thing. And this guy didn't like it, Bobby. So he asked the guy to be quiet. He wasn't quiet. So Bobby got off his chair, went over, grabbed the guy by the hair, yanked him down, and stomped on him a few times, and then kicked him out the door. The guy stumbled down the steps and took off. Came back, sit down next to me, and said, you know, I don't understand these bonefish sometimes. Like it never happened. And then up in Homosassa, if you dared cross to cut them off on when they're polling, or came up to him on a flat and asked, you know, do you have a beer, he would get in the cooler and start throwing soda cans at them. And he spent time in prison, and he was a big drug guy in Miami, importing a lot of drugs out of the Bahamas up through Miami. Anyway, I knew him for quite a while, but I also got to know to keep away from. This was a mystery shopping that we would do at bar counters and restaurants and cruise lines, all kinds of neat stuff.
Damn, that's a good time.
I also, in security, became one of the few techs who located eavesdropping devices, telephone taps, clandestine bugs, microphones, etc. And I did that. I was based in Key Largo. I had an office here actually. That was the one down a little farther that Bill Anderson owned that property. I had an office. But I was based really in Miami. I had an office in Hialeah and South Miami. I did that all over the world. Well, news of that got around. And I'll be telling you about the reason for me meeting another monster in just a minute, because of the debugging. But this guy to the right, it's not a good picture, but he didn't like pictures taken of him. Bert Goldberg, you may have heard of a place, an infamous place now, in Coconut Grove, called the Mutiny Club. It made Studio 54 in New York look like a kindergarten playground. Okay, this place was unbelievable. You had all types of gangsters, celebrities, sports figures in there that you can imagine. And that was one of my shopping clients, mystery shopping clients. And I would go in there once a week and sit at the bar, and just watching what's going on was just intoxicating alone. Of course, all the girls were hustling, and the bartenders were watching out for the owner to make sure that if he saw any undercover people, he warned everybody. Anyway, there it is today. It's not that anymore. They demolished it, they rebuilt it. It's a nice, beautiful hotel. It doesn't have any of its former activities, shall we say. I'm sorry, it's cut off at the top. Some people had rented one of the rooms of the Mutiny, and they were completely drunk or stoned. They put a whole bunch of cash in the tub to hide it, and somehow caught it on fire. And so a fire breaks out, the alarms go off, these guys are afraid of getting caught, so they're coming out the balcony, and the cops are catching them as they ran out of the balcony. That was the Miami Herald, that picture. That's how crazy this place was. People got shot in the place sometimes. No, you know, it's really crazy. Whatever. This is one of the guys who was in there, Aniello Della Croce. He was a monster underboss of the Gambino family. Look at that guy. I was sitting at the bar counter. He's sitting at a table with a couple of henchmen. And I talked to Walter. I said, "Who is that guy?" He said, "Oh, that's Della Croce." I said, "Can I send a drink over?" He said, "No, don't even look at him." I'm looking at him, and we lock eyes. And I froze. I mean, look at those eyes. God, it's scary. This is a fellow who became known by and he lived in Miami a lot, Jimmy Blue Eyes, they called him. His name was not Jimmy, he didn't have blue eyes. But it was Vincent Allo was his name, and he was one of the top mobsters in the country, the Italian mob, but he kept a low profile. He didn't want to be in the newspapers, he didn't want to be involved, and he settled things amicably as much as he could. Well, I was doing the mystery shopping at The Forge on Miami Beach, owned by an attorney who was a protege of Meyer Lansky. This is how these things work. Well, they got word that I was finding deep bugs, transmitters. So this guy contacted me. First he told me it was a different name. I had lunch with him, played around the golf. And then they offered me $200,000 a year if I would give them a week a month. And I would go all around the country to their different mob hangouts to sweep things out, whatever. And I said, let me think about it. I really didn't have to. I went home, I talked to my first wife there. Remember Grady Patrick? You know what time it was? Yeah. Okay, Grady was my father-in-law at the time. I was married to Debbie. We had 2 small kids. And I talked to her and I said, I can't do it, because if the word gets out that you're working for the bad guys against the good guys will knock you off. I mean, it wasn't the Boy Scouts they were playing, you know. They found out that you took out a bug that they spent weeks trying to plant. They would tell someone in the mafia with one of their informants, "Hey, that guy's putting them in, he's not taking them out for you." Guess what happens to me? Anyway, super nice guy. There he is there. He loved to sail and fish. That's what my first wife looked like. Right? Not really. Not really. You we've all heard about, of course, people who loan sharks, right? That's what they would do. They would loan somebody money, say $10,000, and they would have to pay the interest of $200 a week on it until they paid off the $10,000 one lump sum. And if you did not pay it off in time, people like that would show up with a bat. And they didn't play games. That's how they made a lot of money off of charging ridiculous interest rates for loans. This guy came down here. He was a real mean, nasty little mafioso. And violent temper, allegedly killed his first wife. His second wife, he beat the hell out of her, attempted to kill her. She took off, took their daughter, went to Italy, and she ended up writing a letter back to Bobby Kennedy, who at the time was the attorney. No, the IRS, but wasn't Bobby Kennedy, it's way after. And told on him that he had about $580,000 hidden in the walls of their house. So the IRS raided the house, broke open the wall, found all this cash, arrested his ass. But this is the typical, the kind of people they are. They're not nice people, most of them. There's another guy, Freddie Felice, did all kinds of different crimes. He ended up getting killed by, he had a hit put on him by someone else in a different family. They had a commission which oversaw the family. They okayed it. He got his brains blown out one day. And he was involved down here representing one of the families up from New York. That's what they did. They would send people down to different places, mostly South Florida in the early days, and then other places, Palm Beach, Jacksonville, and they would start doing crimes. And again, taking advantage of the lack of law enforcement and the great weather. Miami. Before we get to Miami, Skippy Radine here told me about something that's actually in the book. And he said that there was an owner of a resort here in the Keys back when Jorge Cabrera was prominent in doing drugs. And they would give this owner, he's the wife and husband, $100,000 to go take a vacation for a week. Then they would use their dock to import drugs. Then after that week, they'd have another people they did the same thing with on the coastline. And Skip Smart, they didn't tell me the name of those people or the name of the resident of the hotel. But that's true, right? It was without, yeah, that's how prominent it was down here. It's off for coffee. Grady Patrick was my father-in-law. Grady was one of the offshore charter boat captains for different times. He was offered $10,000 to simply take a trip out, meet a crater going by that would give them the coordinates of where they would be at a certain time. Back then it was RAN numbers, it wasn't GPS. And then he would meet them there, offload what they would either toss over or what they would put in the water, the floating square groupers, wrapped and then floating and what have you. Come back, drop it off up on North Key Largo, one of the roads that ended up there, and go back, and that's it. One pickup, 10,000. And the reason they hit the charter boat captains, Don Gergiolo, you may remember, he got bagged, some others, was because they were used to seeing the Coast Guard and Marine Patrol were used to seeing charter boat captains out there. They didn't really do much. They didn't stop them because charter boat captains would get pissed off if they boarded their boat and looked around for an hour while they got a charter. So they left them alone. Anyway, so we go from the Keys, bounce back up to Miami. And of course, we all know the Cuban Mafia. They're violent. They're very, very violent. Mostly they started off with cocaine, and they got into heroin and all the other things. And a lot of the Cubans, as we know, came over and settled in Miami who were criminals, and they became part of the Cuban Mafia. Not all of them, of course, but a few of them. And right now there's a mini-series on Netflix called Griselda. Have you seen it? Griselda, they show this beautiful, gorgeous woman. No, that's what she's
Sophia, what's her name?
Yeah. And the main thing she sold and became such an empire, so feared, that she was called the godmother of Miami.
Wow.
And guess what her main product was? No, not that cook. A little different type of cook, right? Okay, bouncing up to Everglades City. Back in the 80s, that was a place where they had a lot of fishermen, crabbers. They were dirt poor. They lived in shabby trailers. They were driving 1958 old beaten up trucks. They barely scraped by. But that was their life. They enjoyed it. They inherited it. Well, not only did bootlegging help them when that quit, and after bootlegging, by the way, went out, Prohibition stopped in 1933, organized crime had to switch to something else. They got to gambling. We'll talk about that some. But anyway, Okeechobee City, if you know where that is, if you know where Naples is, it's south of there, about 50 miles on the coastline, kind of isolated. And when drugs became prominent and being hauled into Miami, everybody, the Coast Guard, the Marine Patrol, the DEA, all were looking at all the plane flying in and all, but they weren't looking up here. And they would get these Colombian freighters, and that's a Rod and Gun Club in Everglades City, and some of you have been there, you would know it's still there. Toch Brown was one of the characters there, got involved and helped steer a lot of the drug business. But what happened, these freighters would come in, and the boats would go out in the deep water, the larger boats, 40, 50, 60 footers, a few that were. They would unload the bales onto their boats, or the cocaine or whatever was coming from Colombia or Mexico. They would take it back, and then the skiffs would meet them, transport it in the skiffs, and they would go up the river, turn a river, all of those Losmans, all those rivers that nobody could find unless they could. All the different tributaries, they could do it without GPS, without anything. They were up there. So they would build platforms back in the mangroves above the high tide level and store all these drugs until they came in. And then when the trucks came off of a Tamiami Trail would come down to Everglades City, the whole city would turn out. There were 400 or 500 people. They'd all turn out to load the trucks. So finally, the word got out that all these poor fishermen were all of a sudden living in 4-bedroom, 3-bath houses and had Cadillacs. They had brand new Hatteras. People, the word got up to Naples and then Fort Myers, and they sent some undercover people down there who pretended like they were in the smoked fish business or something, I don't know. And they literally busted the entire city. And it was quite infamous. They don't like to talk about it. Go to Everglades City, don't talk about it. Okay. This gentleman was half legit. He was a horse breeder, and actually his horses had won 4 Kentucky back in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. And he lived in Palm Beach, and he opened up a beach house, and he made it one of the most modern, fantastic, beautiful, plush gambling houses in the entire Southeast. And it had a very, very high-rolling clientele. They had about 10 or 15 people on the security rolls. Anyone got out of order, they got thrown out, couldn't come back, but they could never catch this guy. Guess why? There were 3 newspapers in town. Guess who owned them all?
Nah.
There was a police chief in town. Guess who he owned? He could do whatever he wanted. Once in a while, they would stage a fake bust and have a couple of people pretend like they're being arrested, and they go to the jailhouse. They all say, how you been? Good. They get back to their cars and go. This is what he did for years. He didn't close it down until I think 1949 or something like that. And opened in 1898. Anyhow, quite an interesting guy. There's a beach club. Not bad. This guy is still around. He is allegedly the kingpin boss of the Mafia in Philadelphia. And he had a place, even a restaurant called Merlino's in Boca Raton, and he lived in Palm Beach. And he's only about 5'6", but he talks like a mafia guy. And it's really kind of blows you away when you see him. He looks like kind of a wimp, but he's not. So he found out about all that was going on, how easy it was to do crimes, and that's what he did. He came down to Palm Beach and organized the mafia in the Palm Beaches for prostitution, for drug sales, for you know, they would go into businesses and do protection deals. Give us $50 or $100 a week. No one will mess with you. If you don't do it, they come down and burn your place down when you're not there.
Yeah.
Extortion. So all those type of things, they were always mixed up in. All right, we're going down to Tampa. See, we're going around the state for the Keys up and around. Charlie Hall, back in the 1920s, was from Tampa. He was from a very wealthy family. And it was crazy why he turned to crime. But he did, even though he was not Italian. The Italian mob started to come to have prominence there just after he took over. There was a lot of infighting. And sooner or later, this guy, his father actually, Santo Tropicani Sr., came in, and he had all these connections in New York. He was a made man, came down to Tampa, and they were Cuban, and they really totally took over. They were the only real mafia family in the state of Florida. And they controlled Hillsborough County, Pasco, Pinellas, Manatee, that whole Tampa Bay area. And to become a made man, you had to go through a ceremony. You had to be endorsed or what's the word? You tag someone to do something. Anyway, you have to be nominated by an actual person in the mob, and then they watch you for a year or two. You have to have no background in law enforcement, no friends with the police, have to have at least your mother or father born in Italy, all these different types of things you had to do because they knew they were informants. So they didn't trust everybody. They would trust people that they felt were more trustworthy for the Italians. So then you would go, after a year or two of being watched, if you were accepted, you go to a private building. There would be 2 or 3 people there from whatever family you're getting into, the Gambino family, or Lucchesi, or some of the others. And they would have a picture of a saint. They would put that picture in your hand, light it, prick your finger so there's blood, and then you would put that out. And then you would swear by Omerta, O-M-E-R-T-A, and that meant that you would never rat on anybody ever. You were making that pledge. And in the early 30s and 40s, they stuck to it. Later, they started coming out with a lot heavier penalties for crimes. And so the 2 or 3 or 5 or 8 year sentence that would be reduced to 4 years, they'd get out and wouldn't have to rat on anybody. When the sentences were 30 years, life, they started thinking about it. Maybe I better go to the FBI. And they would, of course, put them in the witness protection program. And that's the only way. Otherwise, if they ratted on them, they'd be dead. So, Santo Tropicani, before anybody from the mafia families anywhere else in the nation came to Florida and did something, they had to first check with the Tropicanis. He came into power in 1954. Remember the guy Wall that I showed you before? His father, when he took over the mafia, made a deal with Wall that he would not harm him ever if he let him just take over peacefully. And Wall agreed. But his father died in 1954. He took over, and he didn't feel he was bound anymore by that. Guess what happened to Mr. Wall? He got murdered. He testified, I think, before one of the committees, and he got whacked, you know, in terms of getting killed. But he was a very dangerous guy. He looked like a harmless fellow, and he was not. And he also had a home in Cuba, and he was very prominent in setting up the gambling businesses when Batista was president of Cuba before Castro. And the mafia pretty much ran Havana. They had huge casinos. They were unscathed because the government was on the take. When Castro took over, he abolished all that. He went to prison for about a week, fought his way out back to the U.S. That guy on the left, James Largo, my first cousin, lives in Tampa. She was married to a guy, and that was his uncle. I know that's a little far-fetched, but that's, luckily I don't have any blood relationships with him. But this guy was the driver for Tropicani and committed crimes, and they set up different front companies, garages, bowling alleys to put money in, and they claim more money came in than it really did. That's how they washed the money. Anyway, he's long gone, dead. I never met him, but she said that he was a very nice guy until you just don't do business with him. And they didn't really bother people in the civilian. They didn't go out and shoot people. They pretty much killed each other. But if you crossed them or got them mad, you forget it. That's my accountant. I just want to make sure Skippy was still awake back there. I know I have a melodic voice. In Orlando, this guy on the right, Harlan Blackburn, became a kingpin in the gambling field of Bolita. Have you ever heard of Bolita? Yeah. Very prominent in Miami and Key West for years. But he was a big kingpin in Central Florida, Orlando, all those counties up there, Orange County and Polk County. He was making, in Bolita, you get 100 balls, each one numbered from 1 to 100, put them in a bag, shake it up, pull out a number, say 54, and they would sell tickets. And if you got 54, you won the pot. And it only cost 50 cents for a pot. So people, everybody was playing the Bolita. They were pulling out $100,000 to $200,000 a week back in the 60s. Okay, that's him on the right there. And that's him on the right again. And interesting, the guy here on the left, for years, everyone thought that was Harlan Blackburn. And even the state thought so. If you go to memory.com, on their photo gallery, this is the photo they have, but I had to point out, because they said that was Blackburn. I said, no, it's not. I made a mistake. A lot of people got that goofed up. But those don't look like very nice guys, do they? They were his lieutenants, and they were out, and they would have all these people out selling all over this place. And one of the guys he suspected of stealing from him. And all you had to do to steal with someone is pretend like someone won a number they don't really give it to, so it's plenty of stuff. So they suspected it was one guy, and they spoke to each other from telephone booth to telephone booth back then. So he set this guy up to call him at a telephone booth on the other side of Orlando. Harlan Blackburn called him from the other one. Well, they had set the guy up to kill him. Blackburn did. So when this guy was in the phone booth, the car pulled up to mow him down and kill him, and at that very moment, a milk truck came right between them and stopped. And the people who were going to do the pull the killing had to take off, you know, they didn't know what happened. So by some luck, that was a real strange event. But he was later killed, murdered by somebody from Tropicani's family, and ended up getting in trouble. He ended up dying in prison. Harlan Blackburn. But there's the bullet. I mean the balls, and there's the tickets they would sell each day. And that was big. That was big all over Florida, the southeast. Here they are there pulling them out, the numbers. There was also operating what they called the State Mafia back then, which Harlan was a member of, Blackburn. So they had a loose mafia set up just about everywhere in the state. You know, the Keys, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, of course, Everglades City, Tampa, Palm Beach, and now here in Orlando. This is a bad picture of a hall. They busted some small town and they got these weapons and drugs and everything. This is up in Tallahassee. We're moving across the stage up to Jacksonville. And this was a real bad guy. He was in the Panhandle. He had a gang, mostly family members. And they ended up going to the house of this guy who they had heard in the safe he had $50,000. Well, the guy had two safes. He opened the wrong safe. He didn't know about the other one. But the guy who was hitting had cameras all over his house. So they left, and he and his father was driving the getaway car. And all these people get caught for murder. He's still in prison. He has life in prison for murder. But they had these gangs controlling the Panhandle. And they were working with the Mexicans, and they would get used cars, and they would take them, they would steal them, used cars, put them on a freighter, take them to Mexico, and then sell them in Mexico. So that's what the mafia was doing in the Panhandle more than anything. So the good guys come around finally, and back in 1950, 51, this guy with the glasses, Senator Estes Kefauver, opened the very famous back then Kefauver Committee. And it was composed of 4 or 5 other senators, and they went to 14 different cities, all because they had heard of a thing called the Mafia. But who was refuting all of that? The head of the Mafia, James Berger. There's no such thing as a Mafia. Well, they had him blackmailed. He was gay, and they had him dressed up as a female, having sex with other men. And they trapped him. And he denied there was even a mafia, the head of the FBI, until 1957. He finally had to admit it. But they were investigating. They went to Miami, Tampa, and a bunch of other cities, Chicago, etc. So the good guys got into the picture. Did it result in anything? No. They went to the Senate. They talked a lot of talk. And then in 1964, no, 63 or 64, John McClellan, another senator, heard how all the labor unions in New York City were controlled by the mafia. And to get anything built in New York City, you had to go to them for cement, for wood, for all of the materials you need. It also infiltrated the garment district, everything. So he was investigating the takeover of unions. Does anyone know who that guy is on the left? That's Bobby Kennedy. And that goes back to, that's our book thing. That goes back to who killed JFK. And a lot of people think that Bobby Kennedy, in 1960, John Kennedy ran against Nixon. It was the closest election in history. In Illinois, Cook County was controlled by the criminals, by the mafia, and Jimmy Hoffa, etc. And they waited until all the other votes in Illinois came in and found out what Cook County, where Chicago is, how many votes were needed to overcome that. Kennedy got elected because of that. So the mob, being the Chicago mob, Sam Giancana, the New Orleans mobster, Marcello, and Trafficani, all felt that they had been screwed because guess what he did when he came in and became Attorney General of the U.S.? He went after the mob. So they wanted to kill him, but they first thought they had a better opportunity in Dallas. This is not obviously for sure. This is what the main rumor is. Trafficani, until the day he died, denied that he ever was involved in this. Just before he died, he told his driver, remember the guy way back there that was my cousin's, told him that yes, they had knocked off him. And that's just before he died of cancer. So I don't know if he had a reason to say that or didn't. But anyway, some say the mob. Marcello in New Orleans found this guy Lee Harvey Oswald who was demonstrating on the streets, Bourbon Street. They got him, coerced him, set him up, and guess who killed Lee Harvey Oswald? The guy who owned a club there came in, part of the mafia, and killed the only witness who could say how he was set up. Makes sense, may not be true. Anyway, that is a roundabout of the mafia in the state of Florida. Obviously, there's a lot more details in the book, and I'd be happy to sign one. The book, if you already have one, I'll sign it. If you haven't, it's a double half price sale today. Actually, I'm kidding. They're normally $28 or $25, and if you buy one at Amazon or Barnes & Noble or whatever, you'll pay $28 plus tax. But here, it's $25. There's no charge, obviously, for shipping, and I'll sign it, personalize it to you, if you do. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to. So, I thank you from the heart of my heart.